Bruchim Aboim B'Shem Hashem. B'Shem Irgin Shir Torah Moses Boston. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's shir by Rabbi Paysach Krohn Shlita. I'd like to thank Mr. and Mrs. Eli Goldbaum for sponsoring tonight's shir, L'chavoid Rabbi Krohn. We'd like to thank Mr. and Mrs. Alti Freilach for sponsoring tonight's shir, L'Nishmas Roiza Shoshana Bas Rabbi Paysach Krohn Shalom Ziyartzah tonight. I'd like to give a shekar to the Gross family for sponsoring tonight's shir, L'Nishmas Rabbi Chaim, Baron Pinchas Gross Alav Shalom Ziyartzah Gimel Ova, who was one of the board members of Irgin Shirei Torah. I'd like to thank Rabbi and Mrs. David Lang for sponsoring tonight's shir in honor of the completion of Mishnayos Eid Anoshim and the Mishnah Yomi program, 2 Mishnayos a day, and also Lila Nishmas, Devorah Bas Yisrael Shalom Lang, first outside Chavtes Tammuz, Lila Nishmas Chana Bas Yitzchak Eliezer, Shalom Basio, second year outside Yudal Tammuz, and Lila Nishmas Avram Ben Peretz Jaffe, 17th year outside Gimel Elul. And finally, to give Shvach V'Dol HaKadosh Baruch Hu on the upcoming Chassan of their son and El B'Shotem Mitzlachas. I'd like to give a big shekar to Mr. Meir Stark for support for tonight's shilu and Nishmas Ovev, Rabbi Yisrael, Ben Meir of Hasholem. To have the great schus of sponsoring one of the shiurim or supporting Irgin Shirei Torah on the occasion of our 22nd annual dinner event coming up in 2 weeks. To show you Akaras HaToiv to the Rabbanim, Maggid Yeshir, whose shiurim we've enjoyed, and have a chelik and abotzas Torah of Irgin Shirei Torah worldwide throughout the year. Put an ad in the journal, call Irgin Shirei Torah at 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Tonight we have the covered Havlos once again by Paysach Krohn Shlita, noted Darshan and author of the Maggid series, who has a new sefer is available from Sarah to Celebration, 3 weeks to Shabbat and Tu B'Av. It's available for purchase here before and after the shir. We covered the calling of Krohn for tonight's Rosh on decision, direction, determination, and daily lives. Rabbi Krohn, please.
It is a great zchus to have been invited once again by Rabbi Elazar Bald Shlita, who is literally Mazaka Rabbim La'alfei Alofim, literally throughout the world. I thank Rav Simcha Deutsch as well. And I just want to personally thank every single one of you. Those of you that are watching on video, live streamed all over, cannot possibly imagine the horrendous weather that we are going through here in New York tonight, the drenching rain. I would like to thank every single person who came here tonight, and especially the women as well, who are upstairs. I thank you for coming in this terrible evening of weather, but hopefully we'll be able to be inspired together. We've come together at a very, very difficult and sad time, not only in the part of the year, the 3 weeks, the 9 days, and of course Tisha B'Av, but we're also reeling from what's going on in Eretz Yisrael. Nobody knows what the next few days can bring. David should have Rachmanis on his nation. But I hope that tonight we'll be able to encompass everything that's going on and hopefully become elevated and better because of it. There is a fascinating marsha in Bechoros Daf Ches Amud Beis. Now it's a very, very long marsha. And in order to find exactly what we're talking about, you have to go to the end of this marsha, which is columns and columns. And he says like this, that the amount of days that there are from Shiva Asar B'Tammuz until Tisha B'Av is 21 days. Why dafka 21 days? So he compares it to the 21 days of Rosh Hashanah till Hoshana Rabbah. Now, from Rosh Hashanah till Hoshana Rabbah, that's a time when all of us elevate ourselves. When we do tshuva, Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the Yemei HaDin. Hoshana Rabbah is when the din is sealed and signed, and we try to do tshuva during that time. Zok the Heilige Marsha, that's exactly what these 21 days are, between Shabbat B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. And then he brings something fascinating. And he says, if you take a look in Yirmiyah, the first parak of Yirmiyah was there by the Churban. In Yirmiyah Aleph, Pasuk Yud Aleph, Hashem says to Yirmiyah, I'm going to show you a vision. Tell me what you see. And Yirmiyah says that he sees a makel shoked ani royeh, a branch of an almond tree. And the almond tree is amazing. It blossoms in 21 days. That's the same 21 days between Rosh Hashanah and Hoshana Rabbah and Shabbat B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. And the flowers of the almond tree are all white. And that's what the Marsha says. This is a time of libun avonos. Libun comes from the word lovon, to make it white, to make it pure. So now we have 3 things of 21. Rosh Hashanah till Hoshana Rabbah, Shabbat B'Tammuz until Tisha B'Av, and the 21 days it takes for the almond branch to blossom, for that the white flowers to come out, and that's what Hashem was showing Yirmiyah. This is the time of Libun Avonos. And if that's the case, every single one of us here tonight, downstairs and upstairs, and everyone watching has to know that these are Heilige Tag. These are days not only of sadness, but these are great days of opportunity. And if we could only think about what we can do and how we can improve ourselves, then, as I wrote in the book, Tisha B'Av could really be that moyed. Tisha B'Av could be that time, if we have done tshuva, Mashiach could come, and as it's written, that it very well could happen that Mashiach could come on Tisha B'Av. And that would certainly be a moyed. But it's only going to happen if we elevate ourselves and we come to the madrega of libun avonos, which means bleaching or whitening our averas. So how are we going to improve? So we're going to talk about different things that we can each change from tonight on. And the first thing, we all know the Gemara in Yuma, Daf Tes Amud Beis. The Gemara tells us that the Beis HaMikdash, the Mikdash Sheni, even though that there was Torah, mitzvahs, and Gemilas Chasadim, but there was a terrible Aveira, a terrible characteristic that Yidden had, and that was Sinas Chinam. And Sinas Chinam, many people teach it means hatred for no reason. What I really think it means is hatred for other people that are different than you. A Chosid has to get along with a Litvak. A Sephardi has to get along with an Ashkenazi. Yidden have to get along with those that are less from than them, and even more from than them. Many times we have a disdain for those who we feel are machmir in certain things, and they do things beyond what we think is the regular, and we don't like them. Why are they doing all these extra things? It's not normal. But that's part of Sinas Chinam. When you have a disdain for other Yidden that are not like you. And there's no reason for that. And that's what we have to think about. And I want to tell you 3 stories that will show us the Avas Yisrael and the Avas Chinam of 3 incredible people. The first one all of us certainly heard of, and many of us knew, and that was Rav Matisyahu Solomon, who was the Mashgiach, Zeichat Tzadik V'Kodesh Levrocha, in Beis Medrash Gavoya. And I just want to say, no one should ever use the expression BMG. BMG is a bezoyan. BMG, it's not TWA and it's not IBM. If Rav Aaron would hear people saying BMG, he would turn over in his grave. It's awful. That's a bezoyan to call a yeshiva by Goyisha initials. It's Beis Medrash Gavoya. And Rav Matisyahu, when he came from London, when he came from actually Gateshead, and he became the Mashgiach, of course, people consulted with him day and night. There was no time that people weren't just ready to listen to what he had to say. So every Friday night, many people would stand online to say Good Shabbos to him. One Friday night, there was a 12-and-a-half-year-old boy who was standing online, and he was waiting to say Good Shabbos to the Mashgiach. When he came forward, he said to the mashgiach, "Can I ask the Rebbe a question?" And the mashgiach said, "Of course." So the little boy said, "Rebbe, I understand. I heard that the circus is coming to Lakewood, and I bought a ticket, but to go to the circus. But somebody told me this week that the mashgiach said that it's not appropriate for a frum boy to be at a circus. Am I allowed to go? I bought the ticket already." So the mashgiach is holding this little boy's hand, and he smiles at him and he says, "Look, if you're asking me my opinion, I have to tell you the truth. I don't think that it's appropriate that a frum boy should go to the circus." So the little boy looks down and he says, "Okay, Rebbe, if you feel I shouldn't go, I won't go." And he's about to leave, but the mashgiach was still holding his hand. He said, "I want to ask you something." He said, "We're still friends?" And the little boy smiles and he says, "Yeah, Rebbe, we're still friends." Now listen to this. 6 months later, the mashgiach was driving in Lakewood. He had a driver, it was at night, and he tells the driver, "Pull in to that parking lot of the shul." He says, "Where we're going?" He says, "You'll see." He comes inside. It's the bar mitzvah of that boy. Rav Matisyo made the effort to find out who the kid was, how old he was, and when his bar mitzvah was going to be. Obviously, he knew the boy wasn't the bar mitzvah boy, wasn't wearing a hat. So he knew that the bar mitzvah was coming up soon. And he comes inside, and the father is almost collapsing. He can't believe the Heilige Mashgiach came to the bar mitzvah, and the boy can't believe it. And they both run over to the Mashgiach, and they say, thank you so much for coming." And then the father says to the Mashgiach, "We're so honored that you came, but why did you come?" So the Mashgiach says, "I would like to speak. Would that be okay? I'd like to say some divrei bracha." So the father says, "Well, of course, what's the question?" And the Mashgiach gets up and he tells the story that happened 6 months ago. And he says, "At the end, the boy said to me, 'We're still friends, right?' So how could one friend not go to the bar mitzvah of another friend? That's why I came." Imagine, the mashgiach is so busy. Every moment is precious. But he knows that maybe deep down that little boy still has a sensitivity, and that's why he might feel bad. So he dafka came. That's Avas Yisrael. That's Avas Chinam. A few months ago, I had the great zchus to be in São Paulo in Brazil. I was there speaking in different schools and different shuls, and on the Motzei Shabbos on the Malava Malka, there were people sitting around the table. So just like I was in Woodlake by Yossi Siegel this past Shabbos, you get to meet new people. So I asked the fellow sitting at the table, "What's your name?" He says to me, his name is Daniel Sonnenfeld. I said, "Sonnenfeld? You related to Rabbi Yosef Chaim?" He says, "Yeah, that was my great-grandfather." I said, "Oh, that's amazing. You got to tell me a story about your great-grandfather, that nobody knows." That's a great question to ask when you know that somebody was related to a great tzaddik or a great Talmid Chacham. So he thinks for a second, and he says, "I'll tell you a great story that's legendary in our family." He says, Rabbi Yosef Chaim was the Rav of the old city of Yerushalayim. And when he got older, Nebuch, his wife, passed away. So he had a daughter-in-law that lived nearby, and every day she came to the house. She came to the house to see how she could help her shver, the Rav of Yerushalayim. One day she comes into the house, and Rabbi Yosef Chaim says, "Don't I hear somebody crying in the backyard, in the courtyard? Who's crying?" And she says, "You're right, somebody's crying." And she goes outside, and she sees it's a Yemenite woman, an almana, who was what they call in Eretz Yisrael the koveset. Koveset comes from the word washing laundry. And she used to come every day, wash the people's laundry in the courtyard. She paid a babysitter, and then she would hang it up and dry it out, and then she would deliver it to all the people that gave her the laundry that morning. And with the money that she earned, she would go on the way home and buy food for her children. But when the Rebbitzin went out, when Shana, that was her name, the daughter-in-law, went out to ask her why she's crying, she said, "I didn't know that today's Rosh Chodesh. I didn't know that Jewish women have a minig that they don't do laundry on Rosh Chodesh. I already paid a babysitter. I'm not going to have any money when I go home to buy food for my children. So Shana goes in and she says to Rabbi Yosef Chaim why the woman is crying. So Rabbi Yosef Chaim says, is there any laundry? Do we have any laundry in the house? She says, yeah, I believe we do. He says, run out right away. Tell her to wait. We're going to be out there in a moment. And she runs out and she tells the lady to wait and she comes back into the house. And together with Rabbi Yosef Chaim, they put the laundry in a basket. And before she goes out, she says to Rabbi Yosef Chaim, what about the minhag in Klal Yisrael that women don't do laundry on Rosh Chodesh? And he says to her, this woman is an almana. You have to understand the priorities. Helping an almana is a deraisa. Not doing laundry on Rosh Chodesh is a minhag. A deraisa overplays what a minhag is. You have to know your priorities. That's Avas Yisrael. Many times we undertake a certain chumrah and we don't know that it's hurting somebody else. We have to know what's a deraisa and we have to know what's a minhag. What are the priorities? That's Avas Chinam. Rabbi Yosef Chaim didn't have to do that for the lady, but he knew that she was in pain. He knew she was an almana. He knew she wasn't going to have food for her children. And now I want to tell you one of the greatest stories. I heard this recently. This happened just a few months ago. There's a fellow in Boca today, Rabbi Yaakov Gibber, a wonderful, wonderful person, a Ruav of a great shul in Boca. And a few weeks before Pesach, he took 25 balabatim to Eretz Yisrael. And he took them to give chizuk to the people on the war front, in the north and the south, where people were dislocated from their apartments. And he went there with his balabatim to try to give chizuk. Fine. He comes there, and the first day, he meets a whole bunch of soldiers, and he's talking to them, he's giving them chizuk, and afterwards, a fellow comes over to him, and he says, Rebbe, could I speak to you privately? And he says, yeah, what could I do? He says, I was there the day Hamas came on October 7th, and I saw how my friends were getting killed at the concert. And I just ran for my life. I didn't know where I was running, and then I saw a forest in the distance. And I just ran into the forest. I didn't know where I was going. And suddenly I saw a ditch, and I ran into the ditch. I jumped in, and the ditch was deep. I just buried my head so that nobody would see me. And I was there for 5 hours. I didn't want to get out until the screaming stopped and the shooting stopped and the yelling stopped. And once it was quiet, then I crawled out. By that time, it was 5 hours later. The IDF had already come down, and somebody was able to help me. I was able to get to a highway, and that's how I got home. He says, Rebbe, I haven't put on tefillin in 10 years. I haven't put on tefillin in 10 years since my bar mitzvah. I want to go down to that ditch and say Shema Yisrael. Would you come with me? Rabbi Gibber never saw this guy before. But how could you not go with somebody that wants to make a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And Rabbi Gibber said, of course I'll go with you. We're going to hire a bus with security, and we're all going to go with you tomorrow morning. And that's what Rabbi Gibber did. They hired a bus, and they all went down south. He knew exactly where the concert was, and he showed everybody where he ran into that ditch. And as he stood outside the ditch, Rabbi Gibber had bought many, many pairs of tzitzis to give out to the soldiers. He put on a pair of tzitzis on this fellow. He put on the tefillin that the guy had had since his bar mitzvah. He had not put on tefillin. And he said, now's the time to say the Shema. Let's go down. And the fellow said to Rabbi Gibber told me, I'm afraid, he said. This guy Tomer with his long ponytail and his small yarmulke said, I'm afraid to go down the ditch alone. Would you come with me? And Rabbi Gibber said, of course I'll come with you. And they went down, and together they cried and said, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That's the only thing the guy knew. He knew Baruch Shem Kavod, Malchus Eliyolom Voed. But the rest of the parsha he didn't know. And all the 10 guys standing around they just cried and said the first parsha of Krishma. That's Avas Yisrael. That's Avas Chinam. They never saw this guy in their lives. They probably will never see him again. But it's a Yid who's begging to come back. And there's so many people, because of the rampant anti-Semitism today, so many Yidden want to come back. All of us have distant relatives that are far from Yiddishkeit. Many of us work with people that are far from Yiddishkeit. Many of us have neighbors that are far from Yiddishkeit. Now is the time to reach out. That's the Avas Chinam. Even though you have no shaykhs, now's the time to invite them. Now's to invite them for Shabbos. See where they're going to be Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. See where they're going to be Hoshana Rabbah. And then I'll tell you the most amazing story that happened with Rabbi Gibber. Rahman al-Itzlan is a great, great hospital in Eretz Yisrael. It's called Tel HaShomer. It's the biggest hospital in Eretz Yisrael. A number of years ago, Newsweek had a survey about the best hospitals in the world. Tel HaShomer was considered the 9th best hospital in the world. Rahman al-Itzlan, today in Tel HaShomer, they have a whole floor for amputees. Young soldiers who lost arms, who lost shoulders, who lost fingers, who lost legs. And Rabbi Gibber went on that floor with all the fellows that came with him that day. What in the world do you say to a soldier who lost a leg or lost an arm? And as they're going from bed to bed, they see an older gentleman, a 70-year-old guy, sitting by a bed in a regular suit, and he's an amputee. And Rabbi Gibber told me, like, they didn't know, should they go over to him? He's obviously not from the war, but what's he doing here? And finally, some of the Balabatim went over to him, and they said to him, "Sir, what are you doing here?" Listen to what he said. He said in 1973, that's 50 years ago, he said, I was in the Yom Kippur War, and he said he lost a leg. And he said he became an amputee. He said, but after the war, I was able to get a job, and I was able to get married. I have children, and I have grandchildren. I come here every day to tell the soldiers their lives are not over. They can still get married. They can still have a job. They can have children and grandchildren. Imagine the Avas Yisrael of a Yid who went through Gehenna to lose a leg. But he knows what other people are going through. And he could feel their pain, and that's what he does. That's Avas Yisrael. And what I want to say to every man and woman that's here tonight, and to every man, woman, and child that's watching, every one of us here, every one of us has gone through challenges. That's what Golus is all about. Some have gone through challenges in family. Some have gone through with children that have gone off the derech. Some have gone through parnasa problems. And others have gone through health problems. Nobody gets away free. But if the Eibishter helped you, that you were once divorced and now you're happily married, and you live through that Gehenna of divorce, you have a chayv kodesh to think about. Who else is divorced now? Who can I go over to and put my arm around them and say, listen, life is not over. You could get married. You could build a family. There's a future. That's what Avas Yisrael is all about. How many people have been at a job for months? And then what happens? They get a job, Baruch Hashem. You have a chayv kodesh to find out who in your shul is without a job. Who in your neighborhood is frightened that he can't bring home bread to eat. He can't bring home money for his family. And if you went through that, that's what Avas Yisrael is. You put your arm around that person and say, listen to me. I know what you're going through. When I was in Yossi's home this past Shabbos, it was heartbreaking. Somebody came over to me, and Yossi saw that. A young man in Lakewood, Nebuch, his wife had passed away. He's in his 40s. He has, Nebuch, 4 children. And he asked me, maybe I could speak to his children. Because I myself went through that. And people know that. My father passed away when I was 21. And I had to support my mother and my younger brothers and sisters. And this fellow, the oldest girl you saw in your living room, She was 20 years old. What in the world can you say to somebody who just lost a young mother, 4 children in the family? But I was able to tell them something because I knew what it meant to be a Yosem at a young age. I understood what it meant to live with a parent who has no spouse. And that's what I spoke to them. I told them, of course, that we could keep a connection. I gave them, I hope that they'll have my number or whatever, they could always get it. But the point is, every one of us here has gone through things. Not the same things. But if you've gone through something, make sure, like that guy who came to tell Hashomer, to tell people life is not over. Because we all need the chizuk at different times in our lives. There's something else that I feel is so important. I want to tell over a story from Rabbi Paysach Krohn, soll sein gesund. Great Talmud Chacham in Israel. He gives a legendary shir every Thursday night on halacha, and then he does on parsha, and then he usually tells a story. Told a story a number of years ago. We will see a fabulous lesson for every single one of us. The Briskerov, who lived in Eretz Yisrael, Yerushalayim, Rav Elvel Soloveitchik, was obviously brilliant, probably a photographic memory. And one day in the early 1950s, he was visited by a fellow from Manhattan. And in conversation, the Briskerov said to him, "What do you do?" So the fellow said, "I'm a lawyer in Manhattan." 5 minutes, the conversation goes on. And once again, the Briskerov asks him, "What do you do?" Now, the guy was surprised. I mean, this is a Soloveitchik. This is a Briskerov, the Gadol Ador. What do you mean? You forgot? You just told him 5 minutes ago. He said, "Rebbe, I'm a lawyer in Manhattan." So the Briskerov said, "I know, you told me that 5 minutes ago, but that's not how a Yid answers the question." And suddenly the guy realized he had been set up, obviously. The Briskerov asked him the question because he wanted him to say that he just told it to him, and he's trying to tell him, "I want to show you something. That's not how you answer the question." And he said, "Take a yoina off the shelf and bring it to me." He takes a yoina, take a look at it. You'll see it on Yom Kippur. In Yoina Aleph, Pasuk Ches, we all know the story. Yoina is on a boat, and the boat is about to sink. And the captains and the sailors are going crazy because there's nothing wrong with any of the other boats. They're all moving easily in the water. The only storm that's existing is around this boat. So the captains and the sailors realize it's because of somebody that's on this boat that Hashem is making this happen. So they go over to everybody, and then they come over to Yoina. Pasuk Ches. Vayomer Elov. Hagida nolono. Tell us, why is this happening? And then they say to him, "Ma malachtecha, what do you do?" Listen to what he answered. He said, "Vayomer aleim." He said, "Ivri onoichi. I am a Yid. V'yes Hashem elokei hashamayim ani yorei. And I fear HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Zok the Heilige Radak, in Yoina Aleph Pasuk Tes, Kivan Sha'omar, Hashem Elokei Hashamayim Ani Yorei. As soon as he said, "I fear Hashem," Heishiv Lahem Al Sheilosam. That was the answer, Ma Malachtecha. That's how a Yid answers the question. You're not a lawyer, you're not a doctor, you're not a graphic artist, you're not a mechanic, you're not a driver. You're a Yid. Oh, you do the other things. You got to bring money into the house. But your job doesn't define you. Ivri adoichi. You're a Yid. That's the definition of Ma Malachtecha. And I think every single one of us has to know that wherever we go and whatever we wear and however we're dressed, they know you're a Yid. You could go on a plane and wear your baseball cap backwards and the visor's backwards or in the front or whatever. Or a woman can wear a lace shaitel, a no shaitel, a big snoot, a little snoot, or the kanga hats, whatever they wear. Can't hide it. They know you're a Yid. So when you drive, or when you say something to a steward or to a stewardess, or to somebody in a restaurant, or a grocer, and you talk in a way which is not nice, just remember, Ivri Onoicha, you're not just representing Flatbush. You're not just representing New York. You're representing Yiddishkeit. Ivri Onoichi. That's a very important thing that we all have to realize, especially during these 21 days. So I want to tell you two things. Rabbi Friend, a few weeks after this year, said that he got a call after that first year from a stockbroker. And the stockbroker says, Rebbe, I want you to know I'm on the phone all day. And I'm making all kinds of deals. And, sometimes I say things on the phone I don't have to tell you. You know how business people can deal. He said, but when I heard your share, I had a paperweight made to put it on my desk. And the paperweight, it said 2 words, Ivri Onoichi. I'm a Yid. You know something? That's not so bad to put on your phone. On your phone or on your computer. Ivri Onoichi. Just remember that. When you're dealing with everybody, that's the first thing that happened. The second thing, Rabbi Fran didn't tell this story, but it happened in Baltimore, but I heard about it later. There was a Rebbe on Friday afternoon that was doing errands for the house for his wife. And he was running from place to place. He was in a rush. It was Erev Shabbos. And he had to have a check, a $500 check cashed. So he goes to the drive-in bank, and, he's in the car, and they give him a cube. He puts in the $500 check. He gives it to the teller, and the teller, gives him cash. He didn't check it. He just looked, he got the envelope stuffed in his pocket, and he went to the next errand. A half hour later, when he came home, he took out the envelope, he put it on the kitchen table, and he and his wife are counting the money. It's $5,000. The guy made a mistake. He saw 500, but in a rush, the teller gave him 5,000. He thought that it said 5,000. So he says to his wife, whoa, we just became wealthy and $4,500. She said, what are you talking about? You got to return it. He said, well, not so fast. It's a Toas Akum. She says, what are you talking about? You're a Yid. You got to return this money. He says, well, I'm going to go to the yeshiva on Monday. I'm going to speak to the other Rebbeim. Let's see what happens. Let's see what they say. So what happens? He comes back Monday, and before he could open his mouth, his wife says, listen to me. I don't care what the Rebbeim said. You're a Yid, and you're going to return that money. And all of us that are married know that when a wife is so determined, you are going to return that money, right? And that's what he did. Listen to this. Friday afternoon, there's a knock on his door. And he says to the fellow, who are you? He said, could I come in? I would like to speak to you for a moment. He says, who are you? He says, I'm the bank teller in the bank that made the mistake. I want you to know Tuesday they were going to fire me because I made a $4,500 mistake. But when you returned the money, they came to my office and said, the guy returned the money. You could have your job. He said, I want you to know the only reason that I still have the job at the bank is because you returned the money. He said, I just want to wish you a good Shabbos. He said, you're Jewish? He said, yeah, I'm a Bukharian Jew. I'm not religious. But now I understand what religious Jews are all about. Ivri Onoichi. Imagine that. This guy had no idea that when he returns the money, he's going to make such an incredible Kiddush Shem Shemayim. But if we always remember Ivri Onoichi, oh, that's a different way the way you talk. And you know something? In our times, when Rahman al-Islam, there is terrible, rampant anti-Semitism. All of us who grew up here in America, who would ever imagine that in places like Columbia and Yale and Harvard, that there would be demonstrations against Yidden? We never thought of this in America at all. So if that's the case, we have to combat that anti-Semitism. And I just want to tell you, I had a discussion with this with one of the greatest thinkers that we have in Klal Yisrael today, a tremendous Talmud Chacham, a very articulate person, and his name is Rabbi Lipa Gelworth. And Rabbi Lipa Gelworth told me something very, very interesting. He said, there are actually 2 types of anti-Semitism. There's an anti-Semitism that we will never be able to fight. And it'll be here until Mashiach. And that's called an existential anti-Semitism. Existential comes from the word existence. Just like the Iranians, all they care about is Jews shouldn't exist. And where did that come from? And the Gemara, frightening Gemara. Shabbos Peites Amud Aleph. My Har Sinai. Why is Har Sinai called Har Sinai? Sheyordo Sina La'akum. Sinai comes from the word Sina. Once the Yidden took the Torah and the Goyim didn't take the Torah. Rashi says, Sheloi Kiblu Boy Torah. They didn't accept the Torah, and that's why they hate us. because we're living a higher standard of morality. We're living a higher standard of life. And the Goyim hate us because of that. Rashi tells us in Vayishlach, halacha hi, it's a halacha biyadua she'esav soine leYaakov. That Esav hates Yaakov. That's going to be forever. And we all know what to say to. We all say, Shelo yachad bovad omad aleinu l'chaleseinu, ela shebachol davar dor omdim aleinu l'chaleseinu. So that anti-Semitism, we cannot fight. Nothing will ever change until Mashiach comes. That was given down at Har Sinai. But there's a different type of anti-Semitism. And that anti-Semitism is what we were suffering in America before October 7th. The war will end soon, no question about it. And it's going to go back to regular. And that's the disdain or the disregard that Goyim have from us. And when does that happen? When we cheat them in business. When we talk nasty to them in a bus, in a train, in a store. And when you do that, that's an anti-Semitism that we could stop. Most of you obviously live in Brooklyn, so maybe your neighbors are not Goyim. But who are we kidding? The fire department, they're not Yidden. The police department, they're not Yidden. The bus drivers are not Yidden. The taxi drivers are not Yidden. And if you act in a way that's negative, that's the anti-Semitism. But we could fight that. We could change that by being menschlich, by being careful, and not ripping out the eyes of Goyim. I'll tell you something, a fascinating thing. And I always say this every time I go to Prague. Morty Melvin and I, where did we go together? We went to one of these places. And I always say, outside the Maral Shul, because the Maral, after the Maral, the Klayoko was the Rov there. And the Klayoko, you have to see this. In Dvorim Beis, Pasuk Gimel, the Eibusha says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Rav lachem soives ha'arazeh, it's enough you've been around this mountain, Penu lachem tzafoina, go north. The Heilige Klayoko says tzafoina means from tzofon, hidden. That's why the Afikomen at the Seder is called tzofon, because we hid the Afikomen. And listen to what the Klayoko writes. The Hatspona, being hidden, keeping a low profile, means she'im yimtza ha-Yisraeli eza hatzlocha. If you have a certain hatzlocha, hide it. Don't talk about it to the Goyim. Don't build your homes with gorgeous outside. It just kills the Goyim. It makes them jealous. You want to build a beautiful kitchen? Fine. Beautiful curtains, beautiful dining room, bedroom, whatever. Beautiful. Inside, not outside. Don't drive a car so that when the Goyim see it, say, oh, look at those Jews. Those rich guys, look what they're driving. Don't cause Goyim to be jealous. Because they hate us because they feel that we took the bracha, that Yaakov took it from Esav. Keep a low profile. My mother used to say in Yiddish, Reis nit ois de Eugen. Don't rip out the eyes of Goyim. Keep a low profile. That's how you stop the anti-Semitism of disregard and hate. Now there's something else. Totally something else that we can do in these 21 days. The Gemara in Shabbos Kufyut Tesamid Beis tells us that there are numerous reasons why the Churban happened. And the Gemara tells us, Lo chorva Yerushalayim ela b'shvil shechilelo bo'as haShabbos. You know why there was the Churban? Because Klal Yisrael was Machal Shabbos. And the Marsha, I just want to tell you when he lived, from 1555 to 1631, he was 76 when he passed away. He writes, even in my generation, people are still being Machal Shabbos. What does that mean? And you know what he says? And we can think about that. It's not easy to keep Shabbos. There are so many halachas, and the Mishnah Berurah writes, Chavetz Chaim writes in the beginning of Chelik Gimel, if you don't learn Hilchas Shabbos every week, there's no way you're not being Machal Shabbos. You know, there are a lot of things you're not allowed to talk about on Shabbos. Can't talk about business on Shabbos. I'm not saying about the Yankees and the Mets. Oh, we'll have to get somebody to paskin on that. But certainly, you can't talk about business. And there are a lot of secular things that you're not supposed to talk about. All the halachas are boirer. All the halachas, what's on the oven, what's on the oven, when you could take it, the cholent Friday night. You have to know all these halachas. So I want to tell you, what does it mean Ki eshmera Shabbos kel yishmereni. How the Eibishter protects those people that are careful about Shabbos. Now in Eretz Yisrael today, there's a fascinating person. His name is Zamir Cohen. He speaks only Hebrew, no Yiddish, no English, but he's the head of one of the greatest and biggest organizations of Kiruv in Eretz Yisrael. It's called Hidabrut. And I've had the opportunity, first of all, to be in his office, 4 floors of all kinds of Kiruv that they do all over Eretz Yisrael. And many times I've had the opportunity to speak on the same program together with him. So after October 7th, I heard that he told a certain story. I called him up, and I said, you got to tell me this story. Listen to this story that happened October 7th. It's not to be believed. On October 7th, we know that there were so many harigas. It was just terrible, especially in a non-frum kibbutz called Nir Oz. Nir Oz, that's what it was called, a non-frum kibbutz. And what happened was, in that kibbutz, there was a young couple that became Balei Tshuva. And they were never there for Shabbos. They would go to Bnei Brak to cousins, or they would go to Ashkelon, or they would go to Ashdod or Yerushalayim. They were never, ever in kibbutz Nir Oz on Shabbos. October 7th, she was expecting her 4th child, Simchas Torah. She says to her husband, we got to be Simchas Torah in Nir Oz. He says, what are you talking about? It's, Simchas Torah. There's going to be no Simchas Torah in this non-frum kibbutz. She says, don't worry, listen. I got to be next to my doctor. I'm due that Shabbos. I got to be there. I can't go into labor if I'm in Ashkelon or in Ashdod, so far from the doctor. And besides, I'm sure that in the shul, they'll have candied apples, they'll have flags, they'll move around with a Simchas Torah, there'll be something. So they decided they're going to be there October 7th. Now what happened was unbelievable. Hamas came, they came into this kibbutz just like they did in other places, and they murdered and wounded and did the most shreklach things to people. And these people were in their home, and they saw on the right side, the left side, Hamas was going from house to house. They didn't come to their house. They could not believe it. They were looking out through the shades, the window shades, the slats in the blinds. And nobody could understand that. They went to every single house. Why didn't they go to them? 2 days later, some of the Hamas soldiers, Yamach Shemon, were killed. And the IDF went searching in their pockets to see if there was any ammunition. And they found maps in all these soldiers' pockets. Everybody has Rahmanas on the Palestinians that are being killed. They betrayed the Yidden they worked for. They worked in Nir Oz. And they knew every single home. And they said, go to this home. There, the children are in the back bedroom to the right. Go to this home. The parents are in the bedroom to the left. And then on their map, they said, don't go to this home. They're never there on Shabbos. Imagine, they knew that they're coming on Shabbos. And so they said, don't go into that house. You're wasting your time. They're never there. Could you imagine? Ki eshmera Shabbos, kel yishmereni. And the next Shabbos, Shitaka had a little girl. But that's amazing. And that's what we have to know. That when we are careful in Shabbos, Hashem will protect us. And that's one of the things, not only Avos Yisrael, as we mentioned before, but also to be careful about Shabbos. Not only Shabbos and Avos Yisrael, but just remember Ivri, Anoichi, and you represent all of Yiddishkeit. I want to tell you a great story that Rabbi Shalom Shvadron told me. And because of that story, I believe every single one of us can change, as you will see in a moment. Rabbi Shalom Shvadron was very close to Rav Elia Lapyan. Rav Elia Lapyan was a great tzaddik. He was the mashgiach in Kfar Chassidim in the northern part of Eretz Yisrael. And Rav Shalom told me that Rav Elia Lapyan every day got up before Alois HaShachar, and he started his Avodas Hashem. As he got older, his children and grandchildren said to him, Zayda, it's not healthy for you to get up so early. You need to sleep. You can't get up so early. Listen to what he said. He said, I'm not going to live forever. And at 120, they're going to bring me to Shemayim, and they're going to give me a faher on everything in Shulchan Aruch. So they're going to open up the first siman. First siman, you know what it says? Yizgaber ka'ari, you got to be strong like a lion. Lamoid baboiker, to get up in the morning. Lavoid as boiroi, to do the work of your creator. Sheyehehu ma'orer hashacha, you have to awaken the dawn. You got to be up before dawn. He said, you think I want to fail in the first siman? They're going to open up the Shulchan Aruch. I'm ready, failing. So when Rav Shalom told me this story, I started looking in the first siman. And I saw something that every one of us can change from tomorrow morning on. Roy l'chol yir shemayim. It's appropriate for every year of shemayim, sheyeh meitzar v'doyeg. You have to be saddened and concerned al churban Beis HaMikdash, on the churban of the Beis HaMikdash. Zok the Heilige Mishnah Brura. How do you do that, Siman Yud Aleph, Sivkot Yud Aleph? By saying al narois bovel before you bench. How many people here say al narois bovel? Mostly none of us. You say Shir Amalos on Shabbos, right? We sing it before. Why do we say Shir Amalos? Because really you're supposed to say al narois bovel. But on Shabbos, you don't want to remember the Churban because that's sad. So we say, Shir Amalos b'shuva shem eshiva tzion. So we talk about the Geula. But every day that we wash and before we bench, we should be saying, Al Narois Bovel. And all of you have been to camp, those of you who have been to camp, know that in most camps, certainly in Camp Aguda, when I grew up, during the 9 days, everybody sang Al Narois Bovel before benching. It's in every single sitter. And that's something that we can be makabel on ourselves in these 21 days. And we can continue doing it afterwards. But certainly between now and Tisha B'Av, except on Shabbos when we say Shir Amalos, we should try to remember the Churban. That's something that's negeah to every single one of us. And it's Kapitel Kuf Lamed Zayin, 137. David HaMelech wrote it with Ruach HaKodesh. Hashem told him that there was going to be two Churbanos, and that's what he wrote it. And I'll tell you another thing. You know what, Rav Shlomo Volba? If you never learned his Svarim, you must learn Alei Shur. Brilliant. Such insights. And he says, in these 3 weeks, shouldn't we be a little bit more careful when we say V'Yishalayim Ircha? Tonight we're going to daven Ma'ariv. V'Yishalayim Ircha. We should underline it. V'Zachzeno Eineinu B'Shuv Cholatziyah. And that's how you remember the Churban. We just fly through those words. And he says in benching by Rachem, you have to concentrate during the 3 weeks, during the 9 days. We're benching every day. We're davening Shemoneh Esrei. We got to think about that. That's in the first siman. We don't want to fail. Want to fail in the first siman of Shulchan Aruch? That's what Rabbi Lapian was worried about. And so I want to tell you now one more thing. And then we'll review, and then with some fabulous stories. We all know the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Everybody knows the story, no point in mentioning it. Kamsa was the friend, Bar Kamsa was the enemy, and the host hated him, and he threw him out. And Bar Kamsa pleaded, please don't embarrass me. He said, get out. I'll pay for my food. Get out. I'll pay for half the party. Get out. I'll pay for everybody. Get out. And they threw him out, and the Rabbanim did nothing. They stood by. They watched how this Bar Kamsa, Nebuch, was so humiliated. And you know what the Orchos Tzadikim writes? In Peri Gimel, Shar Habusha, V'churban Yerushalayim, the Churban of Yerushalayim, this Galgal came about al Yedei Boishes the Bar Kamsa. Because nobody did something when Bar Kamsa was embarrassed. Nobody did something. And he says, Lachein tzarech ha'adam lizar ma'oid. You got to be so careful. Shelo yaseh dova, you shouldn't do anything. Hashem imenu hagia l'shum adam ba'olam busha. You can't say anything that's going to embarrass anyone, including your spouse, and including your kids, and including your employees. And you know what the Orchos Tzadikim writes? He says, if you're sitting and learning, right? 2 guys are sitting and learning, and one guy says a kurma svara, you're not allowed to tell him you're out of your mind. You're not allowed to tell him you don't know what you're talking about. You're wrong. Say, you know, I think that we have to rethink this. Maybe we could look at it in a different way. You can't embarrass anyone. And we all do it, especially to children, because we think as parents and grandparents we can say whatever we want. But I'll tell you something with Rav Matis Yo Zechat Tzaddik V'Kodesh Uvracha once said, when you do that to kids, they're not dropouts, they're push-outs. Because you're pushing them out of the house by being negative. You have to think twice before you speak once. And I'll tell you one of the greatest stories you'll ever hear. And this story was told to me by people that were at this when this happened. Now today in Gateshead, the Rosh Hashiva is Rabbi Avram Gurewitz. Tremendous Talmud Chacham, a great tzaddik. So this story happened by one of the boys that was in the yeshiva for 3 years in Gateshead. And then he was moving to Eretz Yisrael to learn in Eretz Yisrael, and so therefore they made him a Sudas Preda. A Sudas Preda is like a goodbye party. So of course, everybody knew the Rosh Hashiva is going to speak, and everybody knew that the Chavrusas are going to speak, his Rebbeim, but this guy was such a letz, and he was such a Levitic guy, everybody was waiting for his speech. They knew it would be hysterical. So they were waiting for him to speak. And what he said, nobody would ever forget. As a matter of fact, one of the people that was there called me to tell me, you must hear this story. And of course, I printed it. It's in this book, as you'll see. What happened was, this guy got up and said, look, all of you guys know that I'm a Levitic Cheverman, and I've enjoyed my 3 years here, but I want to tell you what happened when I was in the yeshiva, when I first came to Gateshead. It happened the third day I was here. You know, I always get into hassles, you know, with different people as a joke. And 3 guys started chasing me. And they wanted to beat me up. You know, I was a new kid on the block. I didn't know the layout of the yeshiva, so I ran into the basement. I didn't even know it was the base medrash. But they were behind me, so I figured I'll go to the other side of the base medrash. There's probably a door. And there was a door, but it was a door to the library. And you couldn't get out of the library. You had to go back through the base medrash. So here I was stuck in the library. I slammed the door. These guys are banging on the door, and I said, get out of here. And they said, come out. You can't be in the library forever. They said, I'm going to be here until you guys leave. He said, I was there 10 or 15 minutes, and then it was quiet. So I figured probably they left, but I didn't want to take a chance. I was there quietly. All of a sudden, there was a knock. And I hear a voice. I said, who is it? And he said, it's the Rosh Hashiva. I need a sefer. And I said, yeah, the Rosh Hashiva, my foot. You're not the Rosh Hashiva. You're just trying to beat me up. Get out of here. He said it was quiet. And about a half a minute later, there was another knock. And the voice said, I'm the Rosh Hashiva. I need a sefer from the library. Oh, yeah, come on. You can't, you're just imitating the Rosh Hashiva. You're not the Rosh Hashiva. He said, after another 30 seconds, when the knock came the third time, I began thinking, oh my gosh, maybe it really is the Rosh Hashiva. So I opened the door very slowly, and I see it's the Rosh Hashiva, but he's standing like this. He's not looking, because he saw that the door was opening. And I realized what he did. I opened the door, I ran out, and then the Rosh Hashiva went into the library to get the sefer. He says, Rosh Hashiva, I just want to tell you, until this day, you didn't know that it's me. But I just want to thank you. Because if you would have seen my face, and I was supposed to be in your shir, I never would have stayed in the yeshiva. I would have been so humiliated. But I had 3 great years of learning because you didn't want to embarrass me. That's greatness. Who would think of that? It's the Rosh Hashiva, right? Could have thrown him out on his head. That's how you talk to Rosh Hashiva? But he understood that the guy really didn't realize who he was. And that's what greatness is. And that's what we have to be careful about. So let's go over everything that we said, and then we're going to talk about some great things. Let's remember we're in a 21-day period from Yud Zayin Tammuz, Shivasa B'Tammuz till Tisha B'Av. Where did the 21 days come from? From Rosh Hashanah till Hoshana Rabbah. Where does that come from? From the vision that Hashem showed Nehemiah, that almond branch that blossoms in 21 days and has white flowers. That's Libun Avonos. Now's the time that we have to improve. How can we improve? The first thing is in Avas Yisrael, Avas Chinam. Try to be like Rav Matisyo, Zechat Tzaddik V'Kodesh Uvracha, who went to the bar mitzvah of that little boy. Rabbi Yosef Chaim, who understood that almana, it's more important the deraisa than the minig of not blowing shofar. how Rabbi Gibber went down with that fellow into the ditch so he could say Shema Yisrael. How that fellow came to tell HaShomer so that he should be able to tell the soldiers that their lives are not over. Let's remember what the Brisker Rav told us. How do you answer Mama Lachtecha? I'm not a writer for the FJJ. I'm a Yid. That's how I bring in Parnosa. But otherwise, we all have different ways of bringing Parnosa. But your job does not define you. Let's remember Ivri Anoichi. Mama Lachtecha, Ivri Anoichi. Let's remember there's an anti-Semitism that we can't fight, the existential, as Rabbi Gelworth said. But because Sinai is sinner. But by acting decently and not ripping out the eyes and telling other people of the successes that we have, especially Goyim, we can fight that type of anti-Semitism. Let's remember Hilchos Shabbos. Ki Eshmer Shabbos Kel Yishmereni, that couple down in Nir Oz, how their lives were saved because they kept Shabbos. Let's remember the first Siman in Shulchan Aruch tells us that every year Shemayim has to be made Tsar V'doyeg ala Churban. We can do that by saying Al Narois Bavel every time before we wash, before we bench. And finally, let's remember that Bar Kamsa, how did the Churban happen? Because of Busha. Let's be more careful how we speak to our spouses, to our children, to our employees, to anybody that we do business with. Sometimes somebody can get you agitated, and rightfully so. But you just got to remember Ivri Anoichi. And through Busha, that's how the Churban started. I want to tell you a chazal that I came across that many of you may know when I was writing this book. And this is the book that just came out. It's called From Sorrow to Celebration. And as I was preparing about the 3 weeks and the 9 days in Tisha B'Av, I saw an unbelievable chazal. Rosh Hashanah Yud Ches Amud Aleph. Shkula misason shel tzadikim. It's the same merit or value. It's equal. When a tzaddik dies, kechurban beis halakenu. Kesreifas beis halakenu. When the Beis HaMikdash is burned. That means Rahman al-Itzlan, when a tzaddik dies, it's as if the Beis HaMikdash is being destroyed. Why is that? As the Ran says, because where do we get our inspiration? We got it from the Mokam HaMikdash. And when there's no Mokam HaMikdash, you go to the Talmud Chacham, and that's where you get the inspiration. But if there's no Talmud Chacham, and he died, so that's like Sreifas Beis Elokeinu. So it occurred to me, if that's the case, maybe what I would do in the last part of the book, and that's what I did, is that I took the yard sites of great people who died from Shivas B'Tammuz till Tu B'Av. And almost every day I have a yard site of a very special person. And we'll give a little bit of a biography and some Divrei Torah and Anhog of this person. And among the people that died in from Shivas B'Tammuz until B'Av, Rabbi Yashiv was one of them. The Arizal was one of them. Rashi was one of them. Today's the Yortzeit, the last night was the Yortzeit of the Baba of Rebbe. Great, great people that we could learn from. And like this, besides everything else, we can learn some history, some Jewish history about these great, great tzaddikim. So I want to tell you about two of them. The first one is the Arizal. Now, the Arizal had that capacity that he could look at you in your face and tell you what Avera you did and what tikkun you needed. Now, I can imagine that many people would be afraid to look at him, right? Who wants to look at a tzaddik and the guy could, and I shouldn't say the guy, and the tzaddik could tell you, you know, what you did wrong and what you got to improve. So he lived in Tzfas, and Nebuch, he lived a very, very short life, only 38 years. Imagine that Arizal, who was the greatest Mekubal since Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, he lived from 1534 to 1572. There was somebody in his house who was sitting at the table, but he moved very stiffly. So the Arizal said to him, "Are you in pain?" So he said, "Yeah, I have terrible shoulder pain, and I don't know why, because I wasn't injured in my shoulder, and I'm not sick in any way." So the Arizal looks him in the face. He says, "I'll tell you why, because you're not careful on Maimar Chreinim." He said, "Maimar Chreinim? What do you mean? I always watch Maimar Chreinim." He said, "Yeah, but you talk afterwards, before you bench?" He said, "Well, I don't talk, but I learn Mishnayos." Because it says in Pirkei Avos that if you ate, 3 people ate together and they didn't have divrei Torah, so then, it's as if they're eating zivchei mesim or zivchei from avodah zorah. He says, you're not allowed to talk. You're not allowed to learn even after Maimar Chronon. And he told him a Gemara in Brachas Mem Beis Amud Aleph, Teikef l'natilas yadayim, right after natilas yadayim, and Rashi says, Maimar Chronim, bracha, you have to bench. And listen what the Arizal says. The word Teikef is spelled Tov, Kof, Pei. The word Kosef is spelled Kof, Pei, Tov. Kosef. You're not careful on that Teikef, the Eibishter is punishing you in your shoulder. Kosef. Same letters. Who thinks like that? And if you take a look in the Siddurim, you'll see that you're supposed to say Al Narais Bovel or Shia Malais before Maimar Chronon. But once you say Maimar Chronon, you take a look in Shulchan Aruch Siman Kufay and Tes, when it talks about Maimar Chronon, the Behetev says that the Arizal has a story about it. He doesn't say what the story is, but this is the story. So in these 21 days, let's be careful when we watch Maimar Chronon. I can tell you for myself. I saw this story about 3 months ago when I was doing this part of the book. I think, Baruch Hashem, I haven't said a word. As you saw, how careful. I don't say a word after Maimar Chronon, either in learning or in Divrei Chayil. And finally, I just want to end with something so delightful. And that's about Rashi. Now, Rashi was, the Yortzeit was Chof Tes Tammuz. Now, I have a very dear friend, Yaakov Solomon, and he told me this years ago. You will never forget what I'm about to tell you. He once said to one of his kids sitting around the Shabbos table, it was a 9-year-old boy was there. He said, do you know when Rashi lived? And the kid said, yeah, 1040 to 1105. He said, how'd you know that? He said, because the Rebbe said that's when we have recess. 1040 to 1105. You will never forget this, Sandy. You'll see. I'll call you in 3 weeks. I'll ask you, when was Rashi living? You'll know. 1040 to 1105. Now, I have no idea if the Rambam lived during lunchtime, but I do know that Rashi lived during recess. That's for sure. But listen to this adorable story, and with that, we'll close. Rashi's mother, when she gave birth, she lived in Worms, W-O-R-M-S. And we were in that town. I took a trip with a whole group of people in 2099, and not 2099. No. When was that? Right, 29. 1 second. I don't know what year is it. Okay. But anyway, so we took it to 2009. That's what it was. I'm sorry. 2009. And we had this whole group, and we're walking in Worms. And I told them a story that when Rashi's mother was expecting, she was walking down this narrow path, narrow street, and a horseman, a Goyish horseman, saw a Yiddish lady, and he saw she was expecting, so he ran with his horse, and he was going to mamish stab her with his spear. But she was standing, and she was walking, and miraculously, the wall indented in, and she went into the wall, was protected by that indentation, and he kept on riding, and she was saved. So, of course, all of us that were there, you know, in that year in 2009, we all took pictures of the wall, the indentation. And there was a woman with us. Her name was Michelle Ilzenbach, and she was from Lakewood, and she was expecting a baby. I said to her, Michelle, you got to take a picture in that indentation, just like Rashi's mother. She said, Rabbi Krohn, I want to tell you something. I promise you, if I have a boy, I'm going to name him after Rashi, and you're going to be the male. And 3 months later, she had a girl. I still wish her mazel tov. And when I was in Lakewood last week, I gave her the book. And that story is in there as well. So there's sorrow, but there's celebration. And that's the life of Yidden. We go through difficult times, but the Eibush is going to redeem us. And at the end, there will be Mashiach. And that's what we say in the Ani Mamins every single day. The Eibush should help that all of us should take this wonderful night together. This night of terrible weather, but you all came. Hashem should bless every single one of you. We should be able to improve, have libun avonos, whether it's in Mayin Machronim, whether it's in Al Narais Bovel, whether it's not making sure making sure not to be embarrassed anyone, to excel in Avas Yisrael. Ma'amachoinen, as we said, David should help that next year, Igun Shirei Torah, we'll have this year in Yerushalayim Yer HaKodesh. We should all be there. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for listening. And the book is available. Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.
Shem Irgen Shir Torah, Mr. Boston, would like to give a big Yasher Koach to Rabbi Krohn for the very inspiring drasha. Rabbi say to have sponsored one of the remaining shiurim and to have a chelik in the Arbotzas Torah, Irgen Shir Torahs, Arbotzas Torah throughout the year worldwide. You can sponsor an ad in the Dinner Journal for Irgen Shir Torah's 22nd annual summer dinner event, which is coming up in just 2 weeks. And I will show you a Koros HaTov to the Rabbonim, maggid you've enjoyed. Have a chelik on Arbotzas Torah the Rabbim by calling Irgen Shir Torah at 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. I'd like to give a big yashikayach to all the sponsors of tonight's shir. Mr. and Mrs. Ali Goldbaum, the Gross family, Mr. and Mrs. Alti Freilich, Rabbi and Mrs. David Lang, and Mr. Meir Stark. Shikayach. The new book of Rabbi Krohn is available for purchase on the table near the door. Shikayach to everyone for coming. Reb Chananya ben Akasha, Emrot HaKadosh Baruch Hu, L'zakes, Es Yisrael, L'figir Hibnu Torah Mitzvah, Shenem Al Noich Hofetz, Aman Tzidkoi, Yagdol Torah V'Yadeh.